And welcome students to our next unit. We're going to be talking about some file management things such as files and folders and other things like that. So let's go ahead and kick this unit off by talking about file types. So in order to kind of get started, let's first define what a file is, because it's hard to know really what a file is if you don't know. So our purposes, a file will be a single resource for storing information. That's what it's used for. And of course, a file can vary in many different uses, such as music, documents, videos, game files, etc. So for example, what that application is doing. So if it's a music file, obviously it's going to be playing audio. If it's a document, maybe it's something like a Word document and it has just a bunch of text in it, or maybe a couple images. So let's jump into these different file types here, starting off first with Microsoft Office. All right, because these are good ones to kind of start off with here. We're pretty familiar with, I think, some of these. So let's start with the first file type, which is a Word document, which, if you're unfamiliar with what a Word document is, it's a word processing document. That means it's just processing text. Obviously, it's most commonly associated with Microsoft Word. So anything in this application column here, these are the apps that are most commonly associated with this file type. Doesn't mean they're only one, but they're most commonly associated with it. Then we have the file extensions of .doc and .docx, and you'll notice that this pattern kind of repeats for both Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. The reason for that is because Doc, XLS, and PPT are all part of an older version of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, where they didn't have XML support, so pretty much anything like 2007 and older. This XLS format right here pretty much just means that it has XML support, and that's the new format that pretty much all new documents are typically created with at this point in time. So this is a lot more common today, but this is, if you ever get an older version that doesn't have the X, it's still technically openable, but it's just an old version. All right, so let's go ahead and jump to the next one, which we have Excel spreadsheets, which of course are just spreadsheet applications. That belongs to Microsoft Excel, and as you can see, it's XLS and XLSX. Then we have PowerPoint Slideshow, which are simply just a slideshow application. And of course, Microsoft PowerPoint is the app for that, and that's PPT and PPTX. Now, obviously, this is not every Microsoft Office application, but we just want to go a couple of common ones, so I just threw in there publisher files, which are the other type that you might see, which is, of course, belonging to Microsoft Publisher with a .pub extension. All right, let's go ahead and look at our next type, which is that of images. All right, and as we look at images here, we have here a nice, beautiful table for you to copy down of that of file abbreviation and file extension. So BMP, of course, is a bitmap file, and the file extension there is BMP. Now, one thing to note about bitmaps is that with bitmaps, it's literally mapping the pixel to pixel. So a bitmap image, if it is, let's say, 600 by 600 pixels, then that means you have 600 by 600 pixels of information. It's not designed to get bigger or smaller or anything like that. It's literally designed for that resolution because it's a mapping out the bits of color to that pixel there. So bitmaps aren't necessarily the most friendly things, particularly if you want to do anything with scaling. Then we move up, though, to JPEG, and this is the Joint Photographics Expert Group. You're most commonly going to see JPEG or JPEG as the file extensions. You'll notice JPG and JPEG are very similar. JPG is a little more common, but they both are representative of JPEG. Then you have PNG, which is the Portable Networks graphic, which is .png. And it's very similar to JPEG in that they both use compression to kind of render an image into different sizes and stuff like that. One thing to note about JPEG and PNG, though, is that JPEG does not have necessarily a good built-in support for things like transparency. PNG files do, because they're designed a little bit more for that. So if you wanted to have, let's say, an image with a transparent background, you're going to want to have it in a PNG format, because typically in a JPEG format, what you have is you have normal transparency marked. It will fill it in with a color. And obviously, that could be detrimental sometimes. And then, of course, lastly, we have the infamous GIF, which is the graphics interchange format, or .gif. All right, if you're not familiar with what a GIF is, obviously it's like a moving image. That's not video. So that is image files. So we're going to next move on to web files. All right, here are some web files that we can discuss. We have things like HTML, which is short for Hypertext Markup Language. There's two file extensions associated typically with that, which is .html and .htm. HTML you do not typically see as much as HTML, and that will open obviously with your web browser. However, you can edit HTML files with a text editor, Dreamweaver, etc. There's many different kind of applications that can open up HTML files and edit them. Then you have CSS files, which are cascading style sheets or .css. These are typically used to enhance web pages with things like color, different layout options, etc. Again, edited with a text editor, Dreamweaver, etc. And then we have JavaScript files, or JS, or .js for the extension. And you'll see that they perform functions such as user input. There's a lot of other things that JavaScript can do, but that's just a kind of good general description for right now of what JavaScript can do. And similar as before, it's edited typically with text editor, Dreamweaver, etc. All right, now here we got kind of a big one. These are some audio files. These are some pretty common ones that you might see. So let's start with the first one, which is WAV or .wav. All right, and you'll see that we have a couple different notes up here for you. Uncompressed, which means that I have an extra S. Oops. It means that it is raw file data. No compression is made to try and reduce the size of the sound. We have lossy, which means that they use approximations and partial data. So actually information is removed out of the original sound file to create that format. And then we have lossless, which is where they use algorithms to compress the data. So like let's say if you were using a series of, let's say you had just a series of numbers, and let's say those numbers were, let's say, a string of sixes. Like let's say it was, 7 sixes. Well, if you had something to represent the number 7, a string of sixes, then you could just put that character there to kind of make it a little simpler to represent. All right? And you see waves are compressed raw, so they're raw file data. Then let's move into some of these compressed formats here. We have AAC, which is Advanced Audio Coding, which is a compressed lossy file. And they generally achieve a better sound quality than MP3 at the same bitrate. AAC is used in things such as iPhones, iPads, YouTube. They use a lot of AAC because of the better sound quality. Then, of course, we have the infamous MP3, which is Megapixel Audio Layer 3 or Megapixel 2 Audio Layer 3. A lot of times those two technologies kind of interweave. Now, this is a compressed, lossy audio file. And the reason why MP3 makes this is obviously because it's widely popular. And it's almost universally supported. Almost every kind of device these days can play an MP3 if you can play audio. Then we have FLAC, which is the free lossless audio codec. You'll notice that this is a compressed lossless format. Not a lossy, it's a lossless format. So, which means that you're not going to lose sound quality with a FLAC file. It's just going to be using algorithms to compress that sound down. Then we have OGG, which is part of the CIF.org container format. OGG Vorbis specifically is the audio, and this is a compressed lossy audio file. Now, the interesting thing about OGG is that it has, because it's a lossy format, it's typically a lot of the sound compression that is used makes the quality a lot better than that of what MP3 can produce. But because it's not, sold and marketed, it's, kind of one of these open source projects, it doesn't necessarily have as much traction necessarily with MP3. But let's go ahead and look at our last one, which is WMA, which is Windows Media Audio. This is a compressed lossy audio file. In WMA, you'll see a lot. For example, if you took a CD, put it in your computer, and ripped it, that would produce typically a WMA file, unless you specified otherwise. All right, let's just look at a couple quick video files. You have MP4 or Megapixel 4 Part 14, which is compressed lossy audio video container. And the reason why I'm saying container is because typically a lot of times inside some of these, you'll have audio files, you have video files, and what it does, it plays, when you run the MP4, it's calling this up inside those containers. You have AVIs, which is the audio video interleave. This is uncompressed lossy, lossless, or audio video container. And the reason why it has different formats is because it depends pretty much on what you use to create the AVI file. and that's going to make a big difference in what type of compression you're getting. WMV, which is Windows Media Video. This is a compressed lossy audio video container. You have FLV, which is a flash video format, compressed lossy audio video container. You'll typically see FLV used with things like Flash. And of course, remember, Flash is going away, but that's where FLV comes from. So if you ever see it, it's typically associated with Adobe Flash. And lastly, you have MOV, which is part of the Apple QuickTime movie. You might occasionally see .qt for QuickTime. This is a compressed lossy audio video container. All right, that's enough for video. Let's move on to some system files. So these are things that you might find in your computer system. So let's start first off with the infamous MIDI. If you don't know what a MIDI is, well, that's a .mid or a .MIDI file, and it's a musical instrument digital interface. Now, sometimes people mistakenly think that a MIDI, because you can play it in your computer and sound will come out, that it's an audio file, except it's not. There's no audio contained within a MIDI file. Instead, it's really more of an instructional file that explains how the sound should be produced. So it's an instruction that says, play, this, you'll have like a built-in sound library for your computer. So it'll say, like, play violin at, this key signature. And then it does it. It produces whatever that sound library sound is. It's not actual audio data that's been encoded. It's simply just instruction for your computer. Then we have an icon, or .ico. Now, this is an image format for computer icons, which an interesting thing about it is that it's actually not one image, it's actually multiple. And these are typically of varying things like size, depth, quality, all that stuff, in order for having the scalability. So, like, let's say if you have an icon on your desktop, and you have, let's say, a resolution of 1080, well, it's going to be, that icon needs to be a different size and quality than if you had a resolution, let's say, of 4K. Because obviously at 4K you have a lot more pixels, and if you put a 1080 sized icon on a 4K screen, that icon is going to be inadvertently a lot smaller unless you have the larger icon for it. So then let's go and talk about shortcuts, which is LNK. I think these are pretty explanatory. It's a file shortcut, just like on your desktop. You click it, it takes you to like a file or a web page or something. It's easy access to a file or directory. Then we have backup files, or .bak. Of course, that's just a backup file directory. And these are often appended to a file prior to overwriting an existing file. So let's say you open up let's say you're opening up an existing Word document you're editing in. While you have that file open, you might have a BAK file be generated. I'm not saying Word necessarily uses .bak. They might use like a TMP, like a temporary file or something like that. But a lot of times you'll see that kind of information, used for something like that. Then lastly, let's just talk about temporary files, which are sometimes called temp files, which is TMP. And these are used to create temporary information while new files are made. So sometimes you'll see .bak, sometimes you see .tmp. It really depends on just what the application is doing and what it's being used for. So there's some good system files. Let's go ahead and just talk about just a few more. Starting off with RAR and zip. RAR and zip are both archive file formats. Now, RAR is used by the WinRAR for lossless data compression. Same thing with zip, lossless data compression. However, zip is typically one that's used a lot more because multiple apps can, create it and open it, or extract it rather. And so can Windows itself. Windows has built-in support for creating archives and also for extracting them. So you will see zip used quite a bit. Every once in a while, you also see RAR as a compression. And then lastly, just want to show torrent, which is used for BitTorrent files. This is, for anyone that ever does any torrenting, this is what contains the metadata about files and folders to be distributed, such as things like, where's the resource point for all the sharing and stuff like that. All right, let's just jump quickly into a couple programming files. So I have four up here. We have C++, Java, C#, Python, so .cpp, .java, .cs, and .python. Now, one thing I want to note, this is the stuff that typically has your instructions that you put in your code. It's not what the computer actually executes. So for example, with Java, when you create a program in Java, there's actually two files that are created. You'll have a .java file, which has the code that you put in, and then you're going to have a .class file. And that .class file is what, when you run the Java application, actually is looked at, because it's translated the text that you typed into a language that the computer can understand. All right, a couple other common file types here. To kind of start wrapping this up, we have the protected document format, or PDF, and this is kind of similar to the beginning, where we have a couple applications that can open things, like Adobe Reader, Adobe Acrobat, browsers, rich text format, which is for Word, but RTF is that it no longer developed for it. Like they stop support for it. It doesn't mean that you can't use it and it won't work. It just means that they're not going to add or enhance the file format anymore. You have text files, which are used by Notepad or any other plain text editor. You have comp separated values. Microsoft Excel is a good one to use that for, or any other kind of spreadsheet applications. They'll use .csv. You have executables, which are self-extracting. And typically what they'll do is open software applications, or they might even install software applications. They'll typically see something like setup.exe then. And then lastly, we have Windows installers, which are very similar to that of an executable, that they're self-extracting files, but they also are more strictly for installing software applications. Whereas like executables can open and run it and install stuff. Installers for Windows, well, they're mostly just to install the application. Then you'll have like an executable to run. Okay, one thing I just want to note, because I don't remember if I mentioned it or not. Let me just kind of jump back to our Microsoft Office files real quick here. In here, I mentioned that with these applications, these are the most commonly associated with. I just want to kind of mention this real quick that, obviously Word documents, you can open in things other than Word. Same thing with Excel and PowerPoint. For example, you can use like OpenOffice, or you can use like, let's say, Google Drive. Well, let's just take a look at Google Docs for Microsoft Word, because it's probably one that you're very familiar with. Well, if you know anything about Google Docs, if you take a Word document and upload it to Google, then typically what you'll see is that unless you tell it not to convert it, Google's going to convert it from that of a Microsoft Word document to that of a Google document. And if it converts it over, well, now you have a Google document. You can work with it. But let's say you have a Word document that has more than just text. Let's say it has images, and it has columns, and it has all kinds of crazy formatting and text boxes, stuff like that. Well, the issue you might run into is that if you convert it over to a Google document, is that it's not going to be displayed in such a manner that you will be able to keep what your original layout was, because Google is not Microsoft Word. Additionally, when we're doing these things, like file conversions, if you were to then try to change it back, it's not going to work. Because when you convert it over, you've lost a lot of that original, things that belong to the Word document. Now, let's say you just take a Word document, you upload it into Google Drive, and then you just say later, I want to download that again so I can edit it. If you just leave it as a Word document without converting it, your changes nothing will change what the Word document's laid out as. If you, let's say, do this in, let's say, OneDrive, because obviously it's a Microsoft product, you may notice that if you take a Word document, upload it to Word Online, you have some crazy formatting stuff, you will notice that there's changes that, in how your document is rendered in OneDrive. But if you go in and re-download that file, it doesn't do any kind of conversion like Google might. So it stays how it is, unless, of course, you've done maybe some editing to the document. But if that's the case, if you have any kind of like crazy editing that you have, like layouts, text boxes, all this kind of crazy stuff, the easier thing to do is create in the desktop version of Word, save it to your OneDrive, and then just keep opening it inside the desktop version. That way you don't have to worry about any kind of crazy file structure changes. All right, but I think that is enough for today. So I will see you all next time.